So there's been quite a bit of movement and quite a bit to talk about since our last video. The Russian army has continued its advance in the Avdiivka area. On top of that, it does appear like both the Russian army and the Ukrainian army are transferring their reserves to various different places on the front, where there have been some other significant frontline changes. We're going to get into that. Before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we're going to jump right in, starting with the area of Avdiivka. So just a quick note, I am recording this on an old device, an old laptop of mine, and it doesn't work the best. So I'm sure there's going to be some audio issues. I have some pretty weird settings on right now, and there might be some quality problems. So I apologize for that, but this is just what you're going to get the next 2 or 3 video updates. So the Russians, after the fall of Avdiivka, have continued their push. Some of these areas, the Russians moved into them naturally after the Ukrainian army abandoned them. Some of them, the Russians are pressing the attack on. When it comes to the Avdiivka coke plant, which is this steel factory to the north of town, it appears like the Ukrainian forces probably left that area due to issues with supply based on Russian movement both to the north and south. Most of the roads going in, the best roads going into this area, are coming in through the town of Lasso. So the Russian movement in there, the Ukrainians probably could have held on to this area, but it seems like Syrskyi is really leaning in on the strategy of giving up space for time. Is kind of already, we've heard this several times before, that Ukraine would give up ground, but this is the first time that they actually have, which is both good and bad for Ukraine. Good if they're not experiencing these losses for largely destroyed cities and territories, but bad in the case that they are losing ground. And this, it doesn't look good for the war effort. So it has its negatives and it has its positives. In the case of the town of Lasso, the Russians are trying to push into the town. Ukrainians have fallen back to the western part of town, putting a creek and some of the ponds as a buffer in between them and the Russian forces. Not exactly sure what's going to go down here. It seems like the Ukrainians can probably hold this position here at Stochny and Severny for some time. It's also possible that the Russians decide that they want to balance out the front line and push the Ukrainians back to Orlovka. It could really go either way. It really depends on how many resources the Russian army is transferring out of Avdiivka. But this is probably one of the bigger pickups on behalf of the Russians since the last time we talked. It's about 10 square kilometers of territory. So before we move on to where the Russian war effort is now being focused, I do want to talk about the areas to the north first. We're going to speak on Bakhmut. In the case of Ivanovsky battles, when we last talked about this area, had stopped shy of entering the town. It appears like that is still the case. Although there is some video of Russian artillery and drones working on the area, I do expect the Russians to try and seize this ground here eventually. As to when that will take place, sooner rather than later, the battle for Ivanovsky will probably take place. The Russians, if they wait too long, it'll allow the Ukrainians to reinforce the area and push the Russians back. But also, I don't think that this is necessarily a critical goal for the Russians to complete before the end of winter time. There's some other goals, but a lot of mappers are talking about Bogdanovka, Ivanovsky, Klashivka all being amongst immediate Russian goals. I'm not sure if I agree, but I agree that within 2024 Russia's looking to capture all these areas, probably sooner rather than later. Quickly moving to the Liman front, there is activity in this area. I don't have it marked on the map, but the Russians are moving up through this forest belt here towards Ternay. I also don't expect a major Russian effort to take place on this front before springtime. I do think positional battles are going to happen, and I do think It's possible on how those go and presented an opportunity if Russia takes these forest belts that they could launch an attack in the Yakovlivka and Cherny. I would not consider that part of a major offensive, though. It seems like, the lakes and the river here is kind of more of a natural boundary, and it's going to be more a positional battle. So major offensive, of course, would involve trying to reseize Liman, in my mind at least, in this area, which also might happen before the end of the year, but I don't see it happening in the wintertime. Going to the north to talk about Kupiansk, this is certainly one of Russia's goals for 2024. Bare minimum, they're looking to put the city in a position where they can start reseizing it. I think by the wintertime, it seems like wintertime is a good time for the Russians to engage in these urban battles. The weather doesn't really matter as much when you're engaging in the urban fight, but for the meantime, there's quite a bit of work for the Russian army to do. The Ukrainians have pretty good defenses set up, have stopped the Russians numerous times around Senkivka. The Russians have made some gains far to the east of Kupiansk, but at the same time, while these gains are pretty big, there's still a pretty big buffer between them and Kupiansk. So I think Kupiansk is going to be more of a summertime goal for the Russian army. In the meantime, probably going to see positional battles. Russians trying to reach Peshchane and reach the road on the eastern bank of the Oskil River and these settlements down through here. Once that happens, we can start thinking about Kupiansk, at least the eastern half of Kupiansk, being under a significant threat. But as of now, I don't see this as being a major effort either. I think, positional battles are going to rotate between these last couple fronts we talked about. The Russians are going to take opportunities where they see them, but the goal is to set up these battlefields for future operations. The real battles right now are taking place further to the south. Actually, let's just go ahead and zoom in. I already got it set. As you can see, there's definite quality issues, but Pobjeda has fallen to Russian soldiers. This is a pretty big development. This town takes place on the road leading between Marinka, Konstantinivka, and ultimately Ugledar. And the Ukrainians have repelled many Russian assaults and Russian assault activities in this area up until now. So this is probably just yet another bad sign for the Ukrainians that, on top of losing a major city, a major defensive position that was easily defended in the past has now rapidly fallen to Russian assault. So from the map, you can see the Russians are making movements pretty much all around Novomihailovka. There's reports coming from certain Russian sources and videos showing battles in the area, the Russians targeting Ukrainian equipment with drones. Seems like Novomihailovka is an immediate goal, and the Russians are likely looking to capture it before the end of the wintertime, so before the beginning of April. It's a lot smaller village than Avdiivka, so this is a very achievable goal. And whether or not Novomihailovka holds until April, I think will be a good fact to use to diagnose the state of the Ukrainian army. If Ukraine can manage to hold on to Novomihailovka into April, I think that perhaps my assessments of how much trouble they're in, we're off. If Ukraine ends up losing Novomihailovka and Pereskokiivka before April, both, I think that would pretty much indicate that the situation is as bad or potentially worse than I thought. The good thing for Ukraine here is they have some ground to give if they're going to follow, if Syrskyi's serious about this new strategy of giving space for time, not using, a great deal of manpower holding on to every square inch of Ukraine. Konstantinivka is the main town to defend here. Yes, you want to buffer along this road to allow the road to be usable. So, ideally, you'd want to hold on to Pereskokiivka, but if Konstantinivka falls and the Russians move past that and they're able to use this logistic network, that would be very bad for Ukraine. So, ultimately, Ukraine wants to be able to use this road network. If they can't and the battle lines end up going along this road, at least neither side will be able to use it. But if Konstantinivka falls and the Russians advance past this road, that's going to be, borderline disaster. And they might not be able to prevent that from happening in the long run, but at least in the immediate run, that should be the goal. Now, if this road does end up falling into Russian hands, then we can see renewed attempts to seize Ugledar. Ugledar's seen pretty heavy battles in every year, 2022 and 2023. So I doubt it'll be a quiet front in 2024. But at least until summertime, I don't really see or can't really imagine much activity going on there. But, the Russians already making movements to the south. Now on to Robotyne. This is, kind of where we're going to end up. Where we have a little bit on Krinky at the end. It seems like this is the other location, at least that the propaganda from Russian propaganda and Ukrainian propaganda is talking about. Russian sources are claiming that Orekhiv is the next Avdiivka or the next Bakhmut. Orekhiv's actually a pretty big city. I probably should have checked this to begin with, but I'll go ahead and turn this off so we can see the size, just so you guys can get an idea. Population 14,278. Seems like that's probably a bit smaller than Avdiivka. Where are you at, Avdiivka? So let's go ahead and check out Avdiivka real quick. Yeah, it's about half the size of Avdiivka, so, it's not really comparable. Probably, far less effort will be needed by the Russians in order to capture Orekhiv than Avdiivka, but I do think that similar efforts are going to have to be made. And you'll have to excuse me. I'm trying to get these front lines turned back on. Click the wrong thing. I might have just deleted that entire section of the front. That sucks. But we're not talking about that area, so I can fix that at a later point. Let's see here. Oh, no, I did. We got both of them. Bringing them back right now. All right, so the Russians have made advances here in Robotyne up that old line, that old first defensive line. It kind of arcs through here around Verbove. So if you can imagine, there's a trench network basically where I've drawn this line. The Russians have advanced up that and recaptured another part of that trench network. This is the network that the Russians built and the Ukrainians penetrated. But the Russians are rapidly seizing that back, also attempting to enter Robotyne through several directions. They have experienced a setback already, though, with Ukrainian forces driving south and recapturing a large trench network that is south of the city here. There's actually recent video footage and satellite images of Russian troops now attacking this area, confirming that it's back under Ukrainian control. So we're getting information that the Russians are transferring resources in this direction, and we're also getting the information that the Ukrainians are transferring some Marine brigades. So should Orekhiv be the target in the future, it's not going to be an immediate target. The Russians, I'd say, before the spring or summer campaigns get going, are probably just wanting to recapture the Robotyne salient, and especially the town of Robotyne. Obviously, there's some political importance there, it being one of the only major gains last summer for the Ukrainians. On top of that, in order to take Orekhiv, obviously this area is going to need to be captured, and also the Russians are going to want to move both to the east and west of Orekhiv, essentially, and pull it into a semi-encirclement, similar to what they've done with both. I mean, really every battle, major urban battle that they fought in. Mariupol, Lysychansk, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, the Russians always try to encircle it first, choke off supplies before they go in. So as you can see here, quite a bit of territory, quite a lot of changes would have to happen for the Russians to achieve capturing Orekhiv. I don't know what the evidence is that this is the goal, or this is even what they want. Obviously, Raqqa has some strategic value, but in terms of some mappers saying that the next battle will take place here, I think this is quite a ways off. Probably, the Russians can think about this in the summertime if they actually retake the salient. But for now, there's big obstacles here. The Russians, it depends on how many resources they want to throw into this fight. If they decide they want to throw a lot in, recent information suggests the Ukrainians have freed up 4 Marine brigades, and if the Ukrainians pump all their reserves into the area, there could be some pretty nasty battles here. Now, that information actually comes from Krinky over here on the Dnieper River. The Russians have recaptured another chunk of Krinky, leaving only the southern part here. A lot of mapping sources are actually stating that the Ukrainians have already withdrawn from Krinky, and the Russians just haven't gone in yet. Some sources are claiming that the Ukrainians are still present in some of the structures and basements. I'm not going to say anything for sure, but the claim here is that Ukraine has 4 brigades, 4 Marine brigades, which are supposedly volunteer, higher motivated troops that they're transferring away from this fight. They're abandoning this bridgehead, and they're going to send them to the east to fight in Zaporozhye or the Donbass or whatever. Now, the only issue I see here is I'm skeptical that there is 4 Marine brigades operating in this fight here to hold these little parts of Krinky. A couple hundred guys, the low hundreds, is all you would need. Any more than that, and you're overcrowding the area and you're experiencing a lot more casualties. So I really don't think that many Marine brigades are involved in this. Unless, of course, they're all like severely damaged units. And in that case, that's a whole different story. But we could see information about the fall of Krinky in the coming days. We could not. It's hard to tell for sure. All right, guys, that's it for me right now. More Russian movement. Probably a little bit more Russian movement in the Avdiivka area. Upcoming movement potentially to the north. Seems like the main focus right now will be on Novomihailovka and on the Roboty areas. All right, so that's it from me today. Keep a lookout for more updates, and until next time.